last video, but just haven't had the time or opportunity, so hopefully today we'll get one down. Now, with this subject that we're going to be covering today, I will say right off the bat that either this is going to be a fairly long haul, or I'll break this up into two or more streams. We'll have to see, because the subject in particular that I'm looking at covering today, I'm switching genres because I've covered pretty much all of the information that I wanted my players in my upcoming fantasy genre game to cover. So unless they come up with something that they want me to talk about, I'm pretty much going to branch out now into other genres and other types of things you can do with Hero System, and of course with the Hero Designer 6 software. In particular today I'm looking at doing a challenging build, a quite challenging build, of a superhero character using a power called Multiform. Now, a little background on this power, a lot of misconceptions and everything, and I've probably got a few, to be honest, no matter how long I've been playing this game, this system, which is on the order of, 30 years now. So I probably still have some misconceptions and wrong ideas about Multiform. But in essence, it is a power that allows you to do something like Shazam. Billy Batson, normal, young kid, Shazam, super mighty hero. Two distinct forms. And they can only do these forms. So this is a type of shape change, but a more limited type. You can't just shape change into anything and change your power sets and so forth. You have specific forms you can turn into. And that is one of the big things that people miss about this, is they think because it's multiform, I can change into anything. Nope. You have to make up specific forms, and this is one of the reasons why I may break this up, because essentially this is going to require the making of at least two complete characters. So keep that in mind as we go into this, but this is a fairly complicated build. This is one of the more complicated builds that you can get into in my experience. The complications that come up with most other builds involve aspects of a power, not necessarily on the build itself being that complex. So keep that in mind as we go through this, and we'll hopefully figure some things out and so forth. That said, the first thing we want to do is, as per usual, create a new character. I do use 5th edition rules, not the current updated version, which is 6th. I'm not sure exactly what all has changed between the two editions, but I use 5e 5th edition rules. We're going to make a superheroic character, and bam, we're ready to go. Now, first off, here's a problem. If you'll notice, the base points and the maximum disadvantage points that are listed here are basically the same as for my fantasy hero game. That's because the rule set is still set in the system to fantasy hero rules. So we have to come here to current character, and we have to come to the campaign rules, and we're going to view and edit them. So point limits. For a standard superhero campaign, the base points are 200 in 5th edition, with up to 150 points of disadvantages. So that's a change we have to make right off the bat. We also may want to change this. Maximum points from one disadvantage category. In general, there is you can only get a certain number of points from each type of disadvantage that you can get, say psychological limitations, physical limitations, so forth. So that can be tweaked as well. In fact, for superhero games, I tend to go up to 75 points on that. Maximum active points per attack. Generally speaking, 80 active points makes this a damage class. Let's see, what is it? 12. It's 60, so 4 more. Yeah, 4 more. So damage class 16. So this is pretty damaging attacks. You had that in a fantasy game, Yes, but that's because I don't consider some advantages that can be put on there. They increase the active points, but I don't consider they increase the damage class. I'm a bit weird on that. So I'm going to keep that the same, but I've already said it that it just warns you, hey, this is over the limit. I'm fairly generous GM. I don't, in superhero games, I don't tend to allow too much over this maximum, but if you go over the maximum for things, I'll sometimes let go. And let's see, Zero's Theory, thank you for showing up. You asked, what edition did I say? I'm using 5th edition. I have not converted over to 6th, and don't anticipate doing so. I hate to say it, but I don't play often enough or with a wide enough group to warrant the expenditure at this point of going to a new edition. So I am playing 5th edition rules, not 6th edition. So there will definitely be some differences in these rule sets as we go through. Active points per defense. Getting back on this, 90 points. That's a bit high, but again, I tend to set my warnings and everything high because if you hit 90 points in a particular defense, chances are you already know my answer on that question, which is going to be no. I forget why I set it at 90. But it probably has to do with some of the advantages and everything that you can throw on it. And I was making a character and ran into the warning constantly popping up. Because sometimes when you're making a supervillain, you have to remember that you're making an individual that can take on a whole team. And so you need some pretty buff powers, and I just got tired of the alarm, the chime going off all the time. Alright, so the rest of these, max points and skills, I always set to 1,000 because, to be perfectly blunt, especially with superheroes, I don't care. Are they need minions? Exactly. I like seeing characters with a lot of skills because skills in superheroes flesh out the character, and in more heroic level stuff, they are the character. So I just go ahead and set a limit of throw on all the skills you want within your points values. This kind of the same thing with perks, talents, and martial arts. Although martial arts, I would not care to see if you had the points available. I would not care to see 1,000 points of martial arts because I'm like, what did you do? And maximum points and powers, basically these settings are there so that I don't hear the alarms going off. As a GM, you may want to set these things differently and at lower levels, simply so they players that are using your rule set don't go overboard. So then there's rules in general. And you can choose to allow cost multipliers. These play into roles. In my fantasy game, I'm setting magic spells as skills. You can set multipliers where, like, of 1/3, a cost multiplier of 1/3, to do the same thing that I'm trying to do, which is reduce the cost of powers to a point that you can have wizards with more than 3 spells on a 150 point build and still have a viable character with plenty of other skills and things like that. So cost multipliers, this is the way of for the GM to set basically that things may cost more or less than they usually would. So character base roll. The default is at 9. So bottom line for skills and the other characteristic roles, you start out with a 9, and then usually you have a characteristics that's divided by 5. So in other words, if you have normal human characteristic of 10, divide by 5, that's 2 characteristic roles are going to tend to be about 11. You can change that. If you want more powerful, more successful characters, you could always change this base character roll to a characteristic roll number to 11, and now they get a base of 11 plus their characteristic divided by 5. Or you can change the characteristic to be 3 or 2 or something like that. generally speaking, I've never found a reason to warrant changing either of those. The languages, basically, these are checkboxes that allow you to give breaks and bonuses for people who are learning languages that have similarity with each other, like, say, Spanish and Italian. You know, you've got to learn a little different grammar, a little different pronunciation. The languages, though, are quite similar, so learning one and then learning the other is easier to learn, to pick up. And that's what all of these are about. So you can also set a skill maximum, so that you have a maximum level, top level on what a skill roll can be. Oftentimes this is in the heroic genres, like My Fantasy Hero, where you want characters to have skill rolls no better than 13. Again, this is on 3d6. You roll 3d6, you total the number, and you're looking to get less than the skill roll. So in this case, if I had this checkbox, you'd be limited to 13 or less skills. So you'd have to be trying to get 13 or less on a 3d6 roll to succeed with the skill. So there we go. Let's see, allow only one figured characteristic to be sold off. Normally that should be checked. This is a system where what should happen a little over half the time there, Zero's theory. While he's answering, continue on. Rolling less than 13. Right. It's a little, 13 or less rolls should be a little over 50% chance. Because an 11 or less is right around 50%. That good old bell curve that pops up. Or actually no, 13 would be 50%, around 50%. You're right. Sometimes I forget my statistics, even though I am a bloody scientist. Okay, so the reason you only allow one figured characteristic, there are figured characteristics and there are base characteristics in this game. And if you allow more than one figured characteristic to be sold off, there are certain combinations that would allow you to actually gain points. And that's no bueno. So generally speaking, leave that box checked. It opens the door to all kinds of abuse to do otherwise. I like using the increased damage differentiation on strength. Normally, your normal damage for a punch using your strength or to throw an object at somebody is 1d6 per 5 points of strength. This increased differentiation allows for a 13 strength does 2.5 die instead of the 2 dice that would normally be until you get up to the full 15 strength. So I like using that. Some people may or may not. They want you to get the full 5 points. Brilliant. This system is perfect for allowing people to do pretty much what they want, when they want, how they want. It's one of the reasons I love it. Linked different slots in a power framework. Power frameworks are things like they're titled elemental controls, variable power pools, and multi-powers. I'll get into all of that another time. But basically, no, you should never allow two powers within such a power framework to be linked to each other. In other words, one cannot be used unless the other is used first. Just, again, it allows too much room for there to be abuses, for players to get points for nothing. So don't allow that. Just don't. Special type of powers in frameworks. I put Warn. Generally speaking, there's a class of power called special powers. I'm not going to go into which ones are the special powers, but they're not supposed to be in these power frameworks. These power frameworks give you a break on the cost. Myself, I see no reason not to for a lot of them. For some of them, I agree. So that's why I put warn on there instead of do not allow, or the other option is ignore. Uh, Basically, I want the warning. Oh, wait, I need to look for this. And non-endurance using abilities and elemental controls. An elemental control, I'll go ahead and describe, is a power framework. All your powers are, say, fire-based, or all your powers are falcon-based. In other words, you have the powers of a falcon. And basically, non-endurance using powers are not supposed to be in such an elemental control. Again, I don't necessarily agree with that. You're a superhero running out of strength and endurance energy while you're flying, and you have falcon powers. Uh, what's heroic about that? So I tend to say, no, make that flight zero endurance. Go ahead and put it in the elemental control. It makes sense. Others disagree with me. Your mileage may vary, therefore, so work on that from your own point of view. Automatically applied no figure characteristics to primary characteristics bought in the power framework. I leave that unchecked. Again, you might have an elemental control giant powers, and this only turns on when you are in giant form. And so what that being checked says is that automatically any characteristics you buy in that giant under the category of giant powers do not affect your figure characteristics. That doesn't make sense. So I leave that unchecked. It makes for some potential power gaming, but that's where you're the GM and you should be looking over these characters and going, I'm not going to allow that. I don't care if it's not against the rules. It's against what I want to see in the game. It's going to make it where I can't make fun adventures for everybody else because you're too tough or something to that effect. Just, you can't be afraid to say, no, that's not going to work. Standard effect allowed. A lot of these powers, like especially a die power, like an energy blast, you buy 1d6. So you get a variable amount of effect from the power from 1 to 6 points. You can choose to short circuit that and just go for a standard effect, which means that always for each die 6, it's always going to do 3 points of effect. Generally speaking, I only like to use that on things like healing and powers like that, aid, where you're more inclined and more in situations where you can run into, you want to know what the effect is going to be. And so I allow standard effect. Some people don't. Standard effect selected by default. Some people want that to be the absolute standard, as you always on a what would normally be a variable power, you always do the standard effect of 3 points per die. I think that's just as ridiculous. So I like to leave the choice up to the player and then go from there. Then there's an option for using expanded growth chart from the ultimate brick. Again, I like differentiation. I like things being as mutable as possible so that you can get kind of the effect you want as opposed to, just required. Then this last settings, this changes things like how many active points in a power per endurance used. Normally this is 10, so for every 10 active points per power in the power to activate it, you have to spend 1 endurance. So for instance, I've got like that limit of 80 active points in a power, and in a attack power on the first point over here, point limits, see 80. If you had the full 80 points, you would pay 8 endurance to activate that power, or to use that power, I should say. You can change that to 1 endurance for every 5 points, or 1 every 20 points, or something like that. I've never really seen a need to. The same thing goes for strength. You have to spend energy. You have to spend endurance to use your strength. NCM selected. To be honest, I'm not sure what that one's talking about. I think it's non-combat multiple on movement powers, and you can change that. Normally, out of combat, you can double the amount of a movement power. So you start with 6 inches of running, for instance. Out of That's in combat where you're dodging and paying attention to what's going on, so you're trying not to get hit. Out of combat, you can ramp it up to 12 inches of running. And this is game inches. Each game inch represents 2 meters of actual movement. And of course, then the next one, the user can change the non-combat multiple selection or something like that. And then equipment allowed, not going to be useful for us in superhero games because superheroes have to buy everything with character points. They are not allowed equipment. So even though theoretically you could go down to the local gun shop and buy a gun, if you're a superhero, you have to pay character points for that gun. You can't just walk in and buy a gun with cash. Alright, so with that in mind, we can save this as and we'll save it in this particular, no, actually we won't save it in this folder. We will save it in this folder, Super Hero. And there we go. So we've changed the rules now, and you can see, I'm sitting here pointing to it, you can see that our base points have already been adjusted, as has our number of points from disadvantages. Okay, we're going to unclick normal characteristic maximum. Alright, so now we're ready to roll on finally on making this character. Normally you would change the rules, but I wanted to go through it with y'all. Alright, so here we go. We're going to be making a character that uses multiform. I'm going to be making a Shazam type character. There's no shame in this game, and when you're playing superheroes, of going to the source material, comic books, for inspiration. So the character name, I'm not going to name him Shazam for sure. That's a little too much. Let's call him Thunderbolt. Thunderbolt and Lightning, sorry. And we're going to give him an alternate ID of Jimmy Smith. And I don't have a campaign name because I'm just making this up for the heck of it. The genre would be 4-color superhero. Now, 4-color superhero means a game that is like the comic book, the average comic book out there. Good guys are good guys. No or little to no swearing and things like that. So this is 4-color superhero. And we'll go ahead and put my name in as the GM. Why not, right? And again, you can always click to assign an image if you have a picture, an image of this character you want to use. Yes, having a secret ID is an advantage, or under the disadvantages, I should say. And we'll probably get to that. Basically, it's now in 5th edition, it's a social limitation, and you basically have a undercover identity that you have to maintain, or else it gets blown. You can have a public ID, which is another disadvantage, basically saying everybody knows you, therefore they know where to find you and what to do. I had a character once that went from a secret ID. He kept up his normal everyday work persona, and then eventually he pulled a Tony Stark and said, you know what, I'm Iron Man. And switched the secret ID to a public ID. I am this guy. I'm not going to live 2 lives anymore. So you can do either of those, or you can choose to have no ID, which is not a disadvantage. It's not an advantage. No ID simply means nobody cares or has yet to find out who you are. So there we go. So any of this background information we might want to change. You can make him, well, let's not make this character 6'7". Let's drop him down to about 5'8", 5'9". That's going to reduce the weight or the mass of the character as well. And we'll go with that. I'll leave the eye color and the hair color because I don't, I'm going to be lazy. This brown. But this is also where you can fill in a background history of your character, personality and motivations, a quote. Does he have a quippy phrase that he likes to throw out, like Marvel Comics, The Thing? It's always, it's clobbering time. Powers and tactics, how does he usually lead? Does he come flying in and blast people right off the bat and then sit there and hover and go, I am, just things like that. Campaign use, appearance. All right. So now we're going to move in, and first things first, let's go ahead and set up the multiform, not multi-power, totally different thing. The multiform. Um, so because we're going to make this the true form. With using multiform, you have to choose one of the forms as the true form. It doesn't have to be the most expensive one. It can be any of them. But the thing to remember is that all of the multiforms, all of the different forms you can use, which could be any number, must use the same base points to make the character. So let's see a little bit more. Let's call up multiform right there, and we're going to call it up. And basically, you've got to spend a minimum of 10 character points in multiform, in the power. And what you're doing is you're buying the most expensive form. This includes disadvantages. So for superheroic character, that's 200 base points plus 150 disadvantages for a total of 350 points. So we've got to come in here and change that from levels from 50 to 350. And you can see this is not a cheap power. This is why even 10-year-old Billy Batson can still be a 350 point character, even though combat-wise he is nowhere near Shazam's level. Alright, you can also do things like buy multiple forms. It's multiform. So if you wanted a character that could change into, let's say, a hawk, a horse, a mountain lion, and a goat. Don't ask me why. That's 4 forms, so you could come in here and change it to times 4 number of forms, and for each multiple of 2, it costs you 5 more points. See, it's 75 active points right now. Take that off, and you've got 1 other form now for 70 points, or 2 alternate forms for 75, 4 alternate forms for 80, and it goes up by powers of 2. That's one of the quirks of the hero system is they do a lot of stuff on an arithmetic scale. So powers of 2 come up a lot, and as do powers of 5. So keep that in mind. You can also buy instant change. Normally to change forms takes what's called a half phase action. Phases, each turn is divided up into 12 1-second segments, and your speed on your character, which we will get to, determines how many phases, how many of those segments you get to act on, so how many actions you have. So instant change, without instant change, to change form using multiform, you would take a half phase action. We're going to make it longer with this one, but we're coming to that, so bear with me and just hang out. Alright, so this is the base way of doing it. Since I'm making a Shazam type character, we don't need times 2 forms. I'm not going to put instant change because I'm actually going to make it take longer for him to change forms. So how do we do that? Well, we come down here to add modifier. So are there any advantages we want on it? Number 1, multiform is a persistent power, so it's already reduced endurance to 0 endurance, so there's no reduced endurance that needs to be bought on here. Reversion, this is kind of when you're Well, let's define it. This limitation represents a character who will revert to his true form if he is stunned or knocked out while it is multiform. So, generally speaking, not a good thing necessarily. Um, but, you know, you want the option there. Maybe some concepts that require it, or you want it. So I'm going to jump straight to limitations. Activation roll is not appropriate, I don't think. In other words, the power doesn't always work. You've got a chance that you'll say the invocation word and nothing happens. That would be an activation roll. Always on, it's definitely not always on. Charges, this would be for if you only have a certain number of times you can make changes in your form per day. Concentration, conditional powers. Conditional powers are kind of one of the few catch-alls. The power only works under certain conditions. You can make it where it costs endurance again. Crew save, extra time. That's one I want to do. I want it to take a full turn. 12 seconds doesn't seem that long given the nature of Shazam for him to be there to change into the superhero identity. So we're going to make it take a full turn, one turn, for him to change. And we'll see what effect that has. I'll explain it in just a minute. Focus. Does he need a staff or an amulet or something? I'm going to say no here. I am going to say it takes an incantation. He's got to shout the key phrase for the change to come about. So we will go from there, and I think that's going to be about it on the on the limitations. So we're done. So what effect did they put these limitations on? Well, right off the bat, we have an active points on this power of 70 active points. That's a pretty stout power. Remember, an attack power is limited to 80 active points. This is not an attack power, so that limit doesn't apply. But this is superheroes, so you can imagine we're getting up close to the maximum that an attack power could be. So this is a pretty buff power. With all these extra time and incantations limitations on it, the real cost, the cost to the character is down to 28 points. So, bam, and we've spent 28 of our 350 points just getting the multi-power going. Now, that brings up, since we've got this down, this is why you have to make up multiple characters. And this is something to keep in mind going into the making of the other characters. The forms in the multiform are unique and distinct. They share memories, but they do not share skills, perks, talents, martial arts abilities, or disadvantages. Not necessarily. So any of these things that you want to go across forms, to be in each of the forms, you have to buy them for each form. So, that said, let's move over here. Let's start with characteristics, which is a place I always like to start. Why? Because if I find myself needing points, I can always come back and fudge and maneuver the characteristics easier than I usually can a power. Powers straight up cost a certain amount of points, and there's just not a whole lot you can do about it, you'll find. Sorry, have to get some water every now and then. Alright, so since he's a normal in his normal form, I'm going to keep his strength fairly low, but I'm going to boost it a little bit to 13. And you see what I was talking about with the differentiated strength. Over here we see his hand-to-hand damage is now 2.5 die 6 instead of 2. If I'd turn that off, he would just have 2 die 6 until he hit 15 strength. I'm going to raise the dexterity a little bit. Dexterity costs 3 character points per point of dexterity. So doing that costs 9 character points, but it boosted the OCV and DCV, the offensive and defensive combat values. So how easy you can hit others, how hard it is for you to get hit. and changes them from 3 to 4, going to a 13 dex. I'm going to boost his constitution, his con, a little bit. His body I'm going to leave at 10. There are two types of hit points in the hero system. There are body and there is stun, you see down here. When you run out of stun, when you get to 0 stun, you are knocked unconscious. When you run out of body, you are on your way to dying. Most GMs are nice and let you go to negative your body before you are dead, but the point is that to die, you have to run out of body. To get knocked out, you have to run out of stun. Okay? Now, I want these two multiforms to be the same mentally because they share a mind. They don't share a body, but they do share a mind. So since this is Shazam with the wisdom of Solomon, I'm going to boost his intelligence up to 25. And this is one place where the superhero bleeds over into the... and this is where it comes in what I was talking about. Anything you want in one form, to have that access to that in the other form, you must pay for it in both forms. So, if you want him to be super smart, and that carries over to both forms, you have to buy it in both forms. I can't emphasize that enough. So, the same thing with the ego. Ego is willpower. So, we're going to boost that up to 25. And there we go. Now, presence. Presence is both your physical aura and your sense of self. To me, it's very difficult to talk. It's your presence. You have that sense of being, and it can be used to make attacks as well. For an example of a type of presence attack, a policeman shouting "freeze." The normal person is going to be inclined to comply. And basically you're making an attack that police officer is making an attack with his presence. You defend against presence attacks with either your presence or your ego. Well, presence, because he knows who and what he is, even in normal form it should be high, but not that high. Keep in mind, normal human maximum down here, which I turned off, for most of these base characteristics, which is strength down here to comeliness, the normal characteristic maximum is 20. So anything over 20 is superhuman. So I'm giving him a 15 presence, not because in his normal form he's that imposing to look at, but because he does have the backing in his own mind and everything else of that superhero form that he can assume. We got asked, Dex is one that gives you more actions in the 12 segments, right? Dex leads to that. Dex is speed is the figured characteristic from dexterity, and we'll get to it in a minute. Your base speed is your dexterity divided by 10 plus 1. So dexterity definitely figures into how many actions in that 12 segment turn you get. So just a second and we'll get to that. Comeliness. Comeliness is a cheap characteristic. It only costs half a character point for a point of comeliness, and it's basically how good you look. It can be a secondary skill, a complementary skill for things like seduction or oratory, because when you look good, people are more inclined, because people being the shallow beings they are, people are more inclined to believe you, to listen to you. So I'm going to boost the comeliness of this character a little bit. PD and ED are physical and energy defense. PD, physical defense, is basically how resistant to things like punches, bullets, baseball bats you are. And so you start out with your strength divided by 5 in PD. So in this case, 13 divided by 5, you round up. So 3 PD. And the same thing with con. ED is based on your constitution, your con, so it's 3 for this character as well. If I say reduce the con to 10, and you see that the ED is now 2. So This is what we're talking about. These figured characteristics, PD on down to stun, are based on these base characteristics above. So that's PD, ED. We're now to speed. Your speed is your number of actions you get in that 12 segment turn. Okay? So right now, the base speed is 2. Why? Dex divided by 10 will be 1.3 plus 1, which is 2.3. This is one of the few times where you do not round up or round in favor of the player. So your speed 2.3 becomes just speed 2. Now, speed normally costs 10 points per 10 character points per point of speed. So that's where it still comes up to this 2.3 base. You keep track of that because for 7 points, 10 minus 3 is 7, right? For 7 points, I can go ahead and kick the speed up to 3. And that means on segments 4, 8, and 12, in that 12 segment turn, this character gets to act. So 3 actions in a turn, and they fall on, the segments are numbered 1 through 12, so you get to move to act on 4, 8, and 12 with this character at speed 3. If you kicked it up to speed 4, it'd be 3, 6, 9, and 12. So yes, there's a chart that's used to figure out which segments you get to work on, act on these turns. And this is to keep things balanced so that you don't overrun based on, I'm going to take all 5 of my actions at the beginning, and you lay waste to all the thugs, and they never got to do anything. So it's to avoid that sort of thing. And this is one of the reasons I also recommend this software, this Hero Designer 6. It's not that expensive comparatively, really, and all that crunchy work of looking up the phases that you act on for your speed, all the math and figuring out these figured characteristics is already taken care of for you in the back end. So you never have to see all of this math. The calculations are done for you. So I cannot recommend this enough. So we're on speed. Recovery. Recovery is how much endurance and stun you get back when you take a recovery. On any of these actions, you can choose to do your action as I take a recovery. When you do that, you get this recovery characteristic back in endurance and stun. So it can save you from running out of energy, which is endurance, or from being knocked out, which is stun. The higher it is, the more you get back. Everybody gets, at the end of segment 12, so post segment 12, a recovery. So once every 12 seconds, you're getting a recovery without having to use an action at all. But you can always choose to use one of your actions. So recovery for a normal human, 6 is pretty good. The normal human maximum, I think, is 8, or is it 10? One or the other. Sorry for sounding uncertain there, but the bottom line is I use this software so much that some of the little intricacies of the rules, little tiny details, I've forgotten over time because I haven't had to keep track of it. All right, so now endurance, I always like rounding things off, so I'm going to bump that up to 30. Its base comes from your con times 2. So your constitution stat up here 13, so it was based at 26. I bumped it 4 points up to 30. Same thing with stun. I'm going to bump it 1 point to 25. Your stun is your strength divided by 2 plus your con divided by 2. And aren't you glad this software takes care of all this math behind the scenes for you? This is why, again, just you get the software and just use it, and this system becomes no more difficult, really, than any other that's out there. So this is his characteristics, and we're now up to having spent 107 of the possible 350 character points that this character has. So now we're going to go to skills. Since this is the normal form, this is where we're probably going to spend a fair amount of points. I'm not going to give him acrobatics. Most of these skills, by the way, are fairly self-explanatory. Acting. I am going to give him some acting. Analyze. This is your ability to, like, one of the most useful, one of the most common things is analyze martial arts style. The bottom line is every martial arts style has weaknesses and benefits based into its movements, and so you can buy a skill to analyze martial arts, and bottom line, getting an advantage based on what you know about how crane style, kung fu, wushu, however you want to pronounce that word, works, what it does. I don't see any need for analyzer, animal handler, armor smith. I am going to give him breakfall. Breakfall means you know how to take a fall. So this comes in useful when you've been knocked back because you were punched and fall down. You can take no damage from the fall. Or if you're clinging to a wall and you have to let go, you know how to take the fall and lessen the damage from that. Such as that. This is a hero, so bribery is kind of bugging, bureaucratics, climbing, combat driving, combat piloting, combat skill levels, computer programming, concealment. That's hiding things or hiding yourself. Contortionist, conversation. Everybody should have a little bit of conversation. And in fact, it's usually a skill that comes about in everyman skills. In other words, everybody has them. And so with that, I'm going to come in here and edit it and show you how to do that. Conversation is just that. You learn to know how to get information out of people by simply talking to them or to delay them. You know how to hold a conversation, how to keep people engaged with you through speaking to them. So you can check this box, and it's skill levels only. That's mainly done for things like a computer or a science lab or something like that. It aids somebody using it with this skill. So for an everyman skill, first it's a familiarity only. Familiarities only get an 8 or less roll. Now if you want to buy the familiarity, that costs you 1 character point. If you make it an everyman skill, it costs 0 points for the skill, but you only have an 8 or less roll. And if you want to ever increase that, you've got to not only buy the familiarity, the 1 point, but you've got to go on and spend the other 2 points, 3 points to get the full skill. You still have to spend that, even though you started out with an 8 or less roll, the familiarity, for free. Doesn't matter. You still have to pay the full 3 points if you ever want to convert this to the full skill. Alright. Cramming, criminology, cryptography, and yes, I do, and this. Deduction is another one of those. Everybody usually has a certain amount of it, so you could, what deduction comes in is you're able to piece the clues together, consciously or unconsciously, so you make that inductive leap of, well, you know, in the end, deduction is basically a GM, give us a hint roll. Most gaming systems have such a role inherent in the game mechanics because, let's face facts, GMs are fallible. We don't always include enough clues. We don't always include the right clues. And some of these things involve mysteries. So with that in mind, we need deduction. So there we go. So I'm going to actually give this character, due to his high intelligence and high ego, I'm going to give him the full skill of deduction, though, instead of just the everyman. Alright. Defense maneuver, that's a nice little skill that says you know how to move in combat so that nobody gets a sneak attack, a back attack on you. Let's see, just a second, we got another question. What would a bat computer cost in points? The bat computer would cost quite a bit in points. Maybe that should be another video I do where I go into how do you create an AI or a computer or something. Because yeah, something like the bat computer could cost you quite a bit because it would have a huge bonus to your deduction skill. It would have a huge bonus to all these others. So, yeah. Demolitions, disguise. Um, you know what? I'm going to give him not the full blown skill, but I'm going to go ahead and give him a familiarity with disguise. He knows how to. This character knows how to disguise himself a little bit. He's still learning though. It goes along kind of with acting, right? Electronics. I'm again going to go ahead and buy the full skill on that one, but most modern day people would know a little bit about electronics. If nothing else, you can change batteries, you can detect broken wires in a headset, and things like that, right? Fast draw, feint, forensic medicine. Forensic medicine is just what it says. It's medicine that you can go to a crime scene and pick apart, which makes it, you know what, that's a reasonable skill for him to have. But I think, again, I'm only going to make it a familiarity. Forgery, gambling, high society, hoist. Hoist is your ability to lift. You know how to leverage yourself to get the most out of your strength in lifting something. Forgery, gambling, hoist, oh yeah. Instructor, interrogation. Interrogation is generally it can be a heroic skill, but it can also very quickly turn into not a heroic skill. Bottom line, interrogation is just that. You know how to get information out of people. It could be Black Widow's ability to talk them into and learn body language and everything, to get the information and go, oh, so you're interested in this, even though they never mentioned it. So that could be the interrogation skill. You just know how. Or it could just be outright torture. I'm going to break your fingers until you tell me what I want to know. Uh, okay. Inventor. This is for those characters that have a base of they have invented their suit of armor or something like that. And so, keep that in mind. Knowledge skills. Knowledge skills could catch all characteristics. They can be such things as a city knowledge. So we'll give him. I'm not going to come up with a name. We're just going to call it base city. He has some knowledge of the city, the layout, the neighborhoods, public figures, things like that. Since this is Shazam knockoff, mystical world. He knows something about the mystical world with wizards and monsters and so forth. Oh yeah, that reminds me. I did have actually a name for him. It wasn't Thunderbolt. It was the Olympian. Sorry about that. All right. So let's give him one more. Olympus deities. I think I've spelled that correctly. All right. So that's knowledge skills. Languages. We're going to give him fluent conversation in good old Greek. And you can see that they have quite a few languages already backed into this. And we're going to give him idiomatic fluency and literate in both of them. But English is his native tongue. So again, we see the real cost on this is going to be 0. And I need to go back and edit because I forgot to turn on that literacy was concluded in languages. So there we go. Lip reading, lock picking, mechanics. We're going to give him a familiarity with mechanics because he knows how to change a tire, change some spark plugs, change some oil, things like that. Navigation, oratory. I'm going to make that an everyman skill. Most of us have some familiarity with being able to give up and give a speech in front of a crowd, which is what oratory is about. Parachuting, paramedics. This is first aid. This is rendering aid to people on the spot. So yes, as doctor would have this, but doctors would also have knowledge skills of medicine and knowledge skills of hospital procedures and knowledge skill of surgical procedures, and then probably some professional skills down here along the same lines: professional skill surgeon, professional skill doctor, and so forth. So in fact, we are two professional skills. Well, persuasion should be another everyman skill. All of us know how to convince other people to some degree. Poisoning professional skill. I'm going to go with the cheesy way out. His profession is reporter. Like I said, I'm not being too creative with this character right now. I'm just trying to do it as an example of the system and how it works and how to use it. Research, writing, science skills. Writing, by the way, is animal writing, not writing in a vehicle. Science skills, exactly what it says: knowledge, science skill, chemistry, science skill, physics, and so forth. Seduction, shadowing. He knows how to sneak around and follow someone without letting them know they're being followed. That's what shadowing is about. Sleight of hand. I'm actually going to give him a familiarity with sleight of hand. He knows how to pocket things to a degree. This is also the skill you'd use to pickpocket. Okay. Stealth. Most of us know to some degree how to be sneaky. He knows how to be sneaky. And I'm going to give him streetwise. He knows how to handle himself out on the mean streets. Tactics, teamwork, tracking, trading, transport familiarity. Now, here's where you can also get into riding animals, but this is no using them as a mode of transport, not necessarily going out in the field and riding on them. You can load up a horse after all and lead it along carrying the burden, right? So we want small motorized cars. Now here's where this button customize adder, because that should be every man. Everybody knows how to use a car. So we're going to put a custom adder and subtract 1 point for that for the small car. Small motorized ground vehicles, so that's cars. And we're going to leave it at that. And so he knows how to drive a car. There we go. Transport familiarity, taken care of. I'm also going to give him some weapons familiarities. These come in with, can you use a weapon? I thought you had to pay character points. Yes, and anything you have to pay character points for, you automatically know how to use. But there are situations where you can pick up a handgun that happens to be on the scene and use one. But if you want to continue to use that past that one little incident, you're going to have to pay character points for the handgun. So that's what that is all about. As I don't want the character, I want the character able to use what's in the available area, which brings up also, let's see, unarmed combat, fist loads, and there's one other, homemade weapons. He knows how to swing a bar stool. All right. So that's pretty much brings us to the end of skills. Perks. He does have a fringe pass benefit. He's going to have a press pass. So we'll put that in there. It's pretty cheap. And you know what? We're going to give him a reputation. Small and medium-sized, that reporter. And he's mainly, this is a favorable reputation. This is, you're known to be an okay guy. Alright? There is a disadvantage called reputation, and this is where you're known to not be the okay guy. This is where you're known to be the sleazeball or something. Talents, there's a whole slew of talents we could put on, and so forth. And, I don't really think any of these, well, I am going to put one on there, rapid healing. I always like my hero levels and superhero level characters to have some form of healing ability. Normally these talents are the powers used by heroic level characters, but I'm one who is your superhero character has a low level of healing, of regeneration. Why not go ahead and that's what this rapid healing is. If I define it, the character recovers from the effects of wounds quickly. For every full hour he rests, he regains one body. So it's regeneration requiring full rest, extra time, 1 hour. Why go through over here in the power section and work that out when it's already right here as a talent? Right? Right. So I think that is it on those. Some martial arts. Let's give him some martial arts. He knows some kung fu and everything. So we're going to give him a martial strike. We'll call it a quick punch. And costing 4 points. And now instead of 2.5 die 6, with the martial art, he now does 4.5 die 6 with this punch. And he also gains +2 to his defensive combat value. So martial arts are basically just normal combat maneuvers, but they give you certain advantages, certain bonuses and benefits. All right. Let's also give him a martial grab. And we'll just leave that being called what it is. Its advantage is okay, you take a penalty to your OCV and DCV, but you've got 23 strength for maintaining the hold, plus 10 strength to maintain that grab and hold on to people. All right, and I'm going to give him a martial throw. He knows how to fling people over his shoulder when they come rushing at him. And again, you get a bonus to your DCV, and you do 2.5 die 6 plus velocity divided by 5, and the target falls. It's a throw. The plus V divided by 5. Basically, you get a throwing velocity. You divide that by 5, and add that as damage classes to the damage. So normally they take 2.5 die 6. They're probably going to, with 13 strength, take, well, it's their velocity that they rushed you at. So for the normal person, that's 6 inches. Divide that by 5, that's 1. So you're going to get another full die out of that. Okay. Enough. And so now we're to powers again. But I don't really think this normal form character should have any more powers. So right now we're looking at he spent 168 of his 200 base points. So I want to use up at least the base points. So that's where we can come back and start doing things with the skills. Let's edit breakfall. Let's add a couple of points. He's pretty good at not taking damage from falls. He's learned how to do that from his martial arts training. Let's make him a little better with the martial arts. There's these things called, where is it? Damage classes. So let's buy him a couple of damage classes. And if you notice, that now bumped up his strength with the grab to 33. So each damage class add 5 points of strength for maintaining the grab. His quick punch now does 6.5 die 6. And his throw now does 4.5 die 6 plus the velocity damage for the guy rushing at him. So damage classes are nice when you have the martial arts. You can buy them with just hand-to-hand damage as it is, and of course they're 4 points per. I think the 4 points are already have a limitation of only with martial arts, so they only count with these martial arts maneuvers. And you know what? Let's go ahead and give him one more maneuver. I've thought about it. Let's give him an offensive strike. We'll call it a sidekick. So, he can really reach out and kick somebody hard, and you see that it's doesn't land as often, -2 to the OCV, but he's +1 to his DCV defending, and now does 8.5 die 6 strike. So that's getting up pretty sizable damage, and we're at 185 points. So, and you know what, I've been doing this for about an hour, so I may call it a day on this one, but you're getting the point. You have to buy everything you want in this form that you want them able to do. So like, we'll add to his ability with his reputation, and we'll make it, instead of a small medium-sized group, we'll make it a medium group that he's known by, and that kicks up the points on it. The bottom line is you've got to add everything you want in this form, and the next time I'll work on his second form, and you have to buy all of this again. In fact, because I want some of the skills to carry over and some of the martial arts abilities, because he does have all the memories, it makes sense that he would have these things. I'll print out this character and I'll finish it up as we go along, but I've realized now that I've taken an hour, and that's long enough for a video. And I'll present this character in its finished form, this form of the character, and we'll begin building the true superhero form with the next one. So I hate cutting it off, but I just realized how much time we're already spent on this, and basically I don't want to sit here and spend 2-3 hours on one video just building a character. Sorry, glad you could make it, Wondergoon. Sorry you missed, but as I was saying, yeah, it's been about an hour that I've been going, so I'm going to cut it off here. May do another one later tonight. May finish up tomorrow and do it again. I hate stopping things in the middle, but to be honest, I'm kind of running out of ideas and getting a little hoarse, a little scratchy with my voice. So that's all plays into, now's a good time to stop. I've got to come up with, for instance, with another 14 points at least on this character, this form for the character. Because again, they all have to be built on the same base points. Now, I could just leave him at 186 points and say he has 200 base points. You can do things like that. There's no penalty for it. But we also need to slap on some disadvantages. So in the end, he's got a lot more points he can spend, and I'm trying to think of something that would make a normal guy form not superhuman, while at the same time spending superhuman point levels. So I've got to come up with some more ideas. I should have probably done that before starting the stream. So are there any questions at the moment before I call this one for the moment, call it, and get set up to finish it out on another day, another time, maybe today? Anyone, anything? I can see there's 2 of you. That's why I'm asking. I hate dead air. So I'm going to keep talking, but I do really want to let y'all get a chance to type in anything. But it doesn't seem like you can, or you have any questions, I should say. Boy, am I out of it now. All right, I will let it go. I will turn you back to your normal everyday lives. I really will get back to this and finish it up, like I said, either tonight or tomorrow, and we'll see you then. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you. Hope you enjoyed it, or at least tolerated it. We'll talk to you later.